Hello, it is Vicky Eyeball and it's Teach Me Tuesday. And you're probably like, there's another person here today. What's that about? So today is actually a special edition of Teach Me Tuesday. I am calling this the Kolbe Conative Cafe because we're going to talk about Kolbe. And so the other person you're seeing here actually works on my team at Know You to Grow You. And she is also my sister. This is Anjanette Newcombe. She is a fourth grade teacher. She is the youth advocate on Know You to Grow You's team. And so she is going to be working with a lot of our kids on learning their natural way of doing, which might be different than their parents. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, Ange, tell me, when we did your report, I remember you had like a big aha moment when you read it. So tell me about what happened when you first read your Kolbe report that said you were at 6923.
Well, the biggest aha moment was the need for structure. That's totally where I initiate. If there's a problem or something, I have to plan it out. I have to make a list. I love to check things off. And that's always been me ever since high school. I can remember always having to do something like that. So that was my biggest takeaway from doing the test.
Yeah, definitely. And with that 9 and follow through, and if you're not familiar with Kolbe, what we're talking about is the second number. If you look at both of our names afterwards, there's a series of 4 numbers. So we're talking about that second number, and it's how you organize information and organize things. And it's how much do you need a plan and how much do you need to actually follow the plan. And so with a 9 and follow through, creating a plan is definitely the first step. And then following the plan and not necessarily liking to deviate from following the plan is just who you need to be. It's who you are. As opposed to my 5, where I look for pre-done plans and then I adapt them and I tweak them and I change it in the moment. And so obviously knowing you need a plan and you need to follow the plan is really an important thing for you. So how else has this helped you, since now you know, like, this is just who I am?
Well, it's helped me in the fact that now I'm pretty good at making lists for different things and I can organize them and I'm a lot quicker with them. And being able to look at the list, and then that helps me with the next step, which is finding the facts that I need in order to accomplish the task at hand. So knowing I have to make a list, whether it's a short list or a long list, the list has to be there. I have to have a set plan.
Yeah. So it sounds like this kind of gave you a little bit of permission to just be yourself and not try to be like somebody else.
Absolutely. Because some people just go, oh, yeah, I go to the grocery store without a list. And I'm like, oh, no, you can't do that. Packing. Before we go on a trip, I make a list. And my husband jokingly says, okay, but you forgot this. And I said, yeah, but it was on the list. But those are days where I didn't check it off. I have to be able to check off things. And once I've checked it off or crossed it off, I know that everything's there. And then I go back and make sure that I have covered everything on the list.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, during the pandemic as an educator, like the plan changed constantly.
Oh, yes, that drove me nuts. So I was constantly writing down, what do I think it's going to look like? Are we going to be in school? If we're in school, this is what I want to see. If we're on the computer, this is what I need to see. If we're a little of both, this is what I need to see. But it constantly kept changing and it was driving me crazy.
Yeah. So it sounds like that is one of the things that will kind of disrupt your flow, is having the plan, not knowing the plan and having the plan change constantly and having to do multiple plans.
Right.
What else can throw you off of your flow of work?
If I rush through something, at different meetings, they've said, okay, now you need to brainstorm and we need this within 5 minutes. Well, 5 minutes doesn't even give me time to create the checklist to do the idea that you need me to. So that drives me absolutely crazy when there's a time crunch. I don't like to be rushed through something.
Yeah. And I can remember, like, growing up, that there were times when you were like, I'm not creative. And with your 2 and quick start, that thinking on your feet really fast is not something that comes naturally to you. And yet that 2 and quick start, which is called stabilize, is really an asset because you're the person that keeps things the same. If it's working, it doesn't need to change. It can just, let's just keep it how it is. And so the kids in your class know to expect a certain structure and a certain sequence, and that it's not going to be chaotic and all over the place. And you're not going to be changing things all the time.
Exactly. And when it does change, I warn them and say, all right, here's the schedule for today, and here's the change. And
Yeah.
so that helps a lot of kids to be able to see that,
Yeah.
especially some of my kids that are coming from the autistic unit, because they thrive on that structure and change really throws them. So I really make sure I plan that out and let them know. And then the day goes smoother for all of us.
Yeah. So it sounds like that might be why I know oftentimes they will assign kids to you that thrive under structure, even though they can sometimes be a challenging student. I'm curious if maybe that they naturally know that you just, by nature, you create structure. And so those kids do better in your classroom because of that than maybe with a teacher who is less structured and a little more like me and free flowing. And I would probably have those kids like bouncing off the walls if I were their teacher, because I would be changing the plan constantly.
And it takes time, when they come from a teacher that maybe is more like you to a teacher more like me, it takes time for them to work into that structure. And it's a difficult process for both of us.
Mm-hmm. And so I know that as you were going through your youth advocate stuff, you were starting to realize some of the students who were very different than you, that there were some ways that you could actually support them and help them. And I know that your youngest son is very different, wired very differently than you. And so how was finding out that, let's see, he is a 5-2-8-6, so he's a 2 in organization.
Yeah.
How is knowing how you've helped him going to help you with the students in your classroom, since they might organize very differently than you?
Yeah. Well, initially, before I knew a whole lot about Kolbe, when Alex was in high school and when he was in college, I would create lists for him because naturally that's where I would go. And he would say, well, I don't know where that list went. And I would get frustrated because it would take me a long time to create that list. And then once he took the Kolbe, I began to realize that he's not a list type person. I needed the list for myself, but it was not going to help him. So I needed to chunk things into smaller pieces. I needed to give him deadlines, knowing that he was going to work at the last minute. I needed to kind of say, well, it's due on Thursday, when I really knew in my mind it was due on Saturday. So I kind of had to make sure he had it done. But in his mind, he was thinking it's due on Thursday. And so he really likes to work that last minute, study last minute. And so I kind of had to work that into the plan of, okay, you have a test coming up. I know you're going to be able to do well because you're going to study last minute. So changing that up. And same thing with students. I would say, oh, study way ahead of time. This is a big test. Well, now I'm realizing that that's not going to work for all those kids. Some of those kids it's going to work for. Some of them are going to have to take notes. Some of them are going to study on the bus as they're coming into school. So I guess being aware of that and giving them some of those different test taking techniques that they can use, and not just doing a one size fits all, is going to be important.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it right there. It's the world is not one size fits all. And our scores are what's perfect for us. And when we learn to embrace, here's how I do it. And when I do it my way, it's what works best for me, and not trying to force somebody to do it our way, but to give them permission to do it their way, because we can all be successful. We just get there in a little bit different way sometimes.
Exactly.
So,
And I think it's really going to change my teaching style for this fall, going through this training that, okay, most teachers are going to be that follow through fact finder, and that's what schools are set up to do. Now I really need to think about some of those kids that initiate in the other areas, and how could I best help them inside my math classroom? And so I really am excited for the fall to come and to kind of explore different ways that I can help those kids be successful in my classroom.
Yeah, and I know we've talked because we both have sons who have high scores in that final number, the implementer, the kid who needs the hands-on, who is the fidgeter, who's building stuff constantly. And so, really recognizing that in some of those cases, that is just normal for that child, that this is not a sign of ADHD. It's that they need to use their hands to do stuff. They need to use their bodies, and they need to move a little bit more than other students, which our schools don't necessarily accommodate, which is why we both probably had kids who, especially in the younger grades, were always in trouble because they couldn't hold still.
Absolutely. And that's
so
why
what are some of the things you've done in your classroom that you've just, even before you even knew this, you started to accommodate those kids?
Well, there were different fidget toys that we would give them. And I would make it really discreet that the other kids didn't see what was happening, because if you give them a stress ball, everybody in the class is going to want a stress ball. So I really tried to make it things that those kids personally would need. I've also done a wiggle cushion where it's full of air and it has little bumps on it, and it just allows that child to sit on that cushion and move around. And most of the time the kids are real curious about it and they'll want to try it. But what's funny about that is they'll try it and go, yeah, this doesn't work for me. So the novelty kind of wears off fast.
Yeah.
So just giving kids permission to do that. One of the biggest things for those wiggle worm kiddos, I usually put them in the back of the room so that they can feel free to stand up or kneel on their chair without being distracted to other students. It's not that they can't sit still. So they don't want to be disruptive. And so that's helped tremendously. And usually within the first couple of weeks as a teacher, you can identify those kids.
Yeah, because some of this, it's always best to have the assessment because then you know. However, until they're about 5th grade, even the youth assessment is hard to administer. There is one that can measure kids younger, but it involves a videotape, and it's a little bit more of an investment to get that one. So not as many people do that. But, sometimes just observing, especially when you're around your kids or other students, you start to notice like they're different than me. Like what works for them? So what do you think would have made a difference if you had known Alex's scores like back in elementary or middle school instead?
I wouldn't have pushed him to do his planner because he's the type of kid that doesn't keep a planner. And I would say, why are you not getting this done? I wouldn't have been on him constantly about the famous AR quizzes and reading those books, and saying you had to do so many each week, because he's not like that. I wouldn't have been on him about waiting last minute to do things, because that's in his MO. He waits to the last minute to do things, but they do get done.
Yeah.
And then probably with folders, having him have one folder instead of a multitude of folders, because that was really throwing him off for keeping up with schoolwork.
Yeah. And I know both of our kids, we'd open their backpacks and it would be an explosion of papers. And we'd be like, why is this?
Yes.
And here it was really just part of their MO. Their style of organization does not look organized at all to the rest of the world. But yet they could ultimately find most of the things they needed. And so they just needed something that was simpler and more adaptive. So we've spent a lot of time over the years talking about Kolbe and the different things that that it allows us to be able to understand and do. And one of the things I love to point out is how different people can still get along and work together. And so I'm going to actually share my screen here real quick. And I'm going to pull up what we look like compared to each other. Because we've had our moments, especially when we were younger, but we get along very well as adults. And yet we have these 2 points where we have a high potential for conflict. We're very similar in how we gather information. We're similar in neither one of us should be building anything. We should just hire people. But how we organize and how we deal with risk and uncertainty is very, very different. And yet we find a way to kind of bridge the gap. And so I think this proves that, you know, teachers can take care of students who are very different than them if they understand where the differences are and are aware of it, and just like, you know, working together. We clearly are not going to put me in charge of developing plans. That's going to be you. And I'm not going to be asking you to come up with a whole bunch of creative ideas. I'll take that on. And so it just gives us this ability to kind of divide and conquer the work. And if we need a shortcut for something, neither one of us is going to do that. We're going to get a hold of Eric and let him create the shortcut, because that's his gift. And so what I love about this is you can look at, yes, there's a potential for conflict, but in my mind, there's a potential for collaboration, because what's not my strength is somebody else's, and I can rely on them to take that over.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think it's nice to have a multitude of people who have different Kolbe type scores, because everybody comes to the table with a gift, and you're not going to get stuck as a team of, oh my gosh, we have to take a risk here, and none of us are risk takers, you know. Right. Whereas in our team, we do have a risk taker that's willing to take on that risk, and kind of makes the team more cohesive.
Yeah. And thank goodness we have somebody who's a little bit higher of an implementer than the two of us to kind of build some things and fix some things for us too. So it is really nice to have that balance in that team synergy. And so if somebody were thinking about getting their Kolbe assessment done and they weren't sure if this would really help them, what would you say?
Well, I would say, you know, the type of person that might want to do this is somebody who is stuck maybe in a job where they're like, okay, gosh, I'm really not happy with this. I need something else to do. Maybe they're struggling in school. They're struggling with a colleague and don't understand that colleague and how they function. This would be the type of thing that you would want to find out. And as parent children relationships, you know, understanding why your child is not doing things the way you are really helps the whole process so much. It's helped us so much.
Yeah, I agree. So many of the things I see going on, if we understood the other person's work style as well as our own, just like when I showed on the A to A, you can see, okay, there's where the conflict point is. How do we find a way to work together on this? And for me to honor you being you, and for you to honor me being me, because at the end of the day, Kathy Kolbe, her number one goal for this, and I love it, is for you to have the freedom to be yourself. And absolutely. I know that when I read my results, I was like, wow, I get to do it that way, because that's who I am. Just like when you got your results and you're like, this is who I am. This is exactly how I do work.
Yes, absolutely. So, to a T, it was me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share a little bit about your experience with Kolbe. And if you guys like this, let me know in the comments, because there are other people that I would love to have come on and share about their experience with Kolbe and how they approach work, which is different than me, and it's different than Anjanette's. And I think there's a great learning and understanding other people, so that then we can work more collaboratively. So until next time, this has been Vicki Eyeball with Teach Me Tuesday, joined by Anjanette Newcombe. Thank you, everybody. Bye.